that the Bitcoin market would bottom just yet fully. So I still think we need to wash out more of the weak-handed Bitcoin, the cryptos, and that will finally give us later this year a big point bottom.
In this interview, Gareth Soloway reminded everyone that a spike in Bitcoin's price is pretty much inevitable. He said that we'll get a short-term bottom when the weak hands exit the market after experiencing FUD. He then pulled up the Bitcoin chart and looked at Bitcoin's prices in 2017 to conclude that there's some legit proof and data that we've finally hit the bottom. Basically, he suggested that after hitting 17K, he expects a bounce for Bitcoin. To find out where this bounce will take Bitcoin, please watch this video till the end. Also, I'd just like to remind you that we're giving away $100 to a random subscriber at the end of this month. To take part in it, all you have to do is subscribe to our channel, turn on post notifications, like this video, and leave a comment in the comments section below. Good luck. Now, let's look at his interview.
I mean, we've seen such a collapse from the 65-ish thousand when we were doing that live interview in Dubai, which was just awesome. I still remember I was the loneliest man in the room. No one really wanted to talk to me too much there. I kind of had to stand in the corner because I was the only one that was bearish. But again, price is always king. Charts are always truth versus emotion. And I think we always have to remember that whether you're a bull or a bear, price and price charts are what's going to give you the clearest signal. So we saw the break of 20,000 just this past, really this past weekend. And the key here is to understand why it broke 20,000, because there were a lot of people saying, hey, 20,000 is the low, and by the way, they all came on once we got to like 30, they all piled on the bandwagon. But the bottom line is when you have everyone calling for a low of 20, you have a lot of people putting stops just under 20. And it's the tendency of a market to run those stops, make people freak out, make the weak hands exit, and then you finally get a short-term bottom. And I think that's what we have here on Bitcoin. And again, I want to show you a couple things of why I think it's a bottom. So we're going to turn over to the charts here. And what you could see here is that we had this collapse from about 40,000 down to about 26 or so, 25 and 26. That move down of 14,000, it's about $14,000, was replicated perfectly with a measured move down to about 17,500. So that's a measured move. That gives you a good basis for a low. In addition, if we take a look, we know that the January or the December 2017 high, that was a major level. We have now recaptured it after just piercing it briefly. So we know that support. And then even one more little tidbit of great technical analysis is that if you take the low from March of 2020, which is the low from COVID, which was the lowest point going back to quite a while on Bitcoin, it was around $4,000. And if you connect it to this recent low and you drag a parallel line up, you get the two highs from last April as well as November. So there's a confluence of technical supports right here that signal to me, at least we have a bounce here, probably to 25 to 30,000 in the cards. So I think it'll be faster. I think as we get and stay above 20,000, a lot more people are going to start to say, hey, we have a major low in Bitcoin, and you're going to see the bulls come back with a vengeance, trying to say, okay, now we're going to start heading back up to all-time highs. I think that'll propel it over the next probably 3 to 6 weeks back to 25 to 30,000, which again, from 17,000 is a low, or 17.5 percentage-wise, that's massive. Now, if you're in from 60 or 65, that doesn't seem such a good bounce. But again, in percentage terms, that's a major, major move. Now, once we get there, unfortunately, I still see more downside. I still think that we will likely head down to probably about 12,000, which is my second price target on the downside. So I think it's important to recognize that I remain a long-term bull on Bitcoin. In fact, when we broke 20,000 at 19, I announced that I started my beginning hodl position. And so ever since we were at 65,000, even though I was bearish, I was always saying, hey, listen, long-term, I think there's a huge place in the economy, in the world for Bitcoin. And I think we'll get there. We'll get to 100,000, 500, maybe $1 million. It's just, you have to flush out all the weak nonsense. I think last time we talked about that Darwinian concept of only the strongest will survive. And you just have so much crap in the system, frankly, right? So the idea here is that in the near term, a bounce back to 25 or 30, the reason 25 is a key level is that is your low from the Terra Luna collapse. So that is going to be resistance. And then if you go up, there was a ton of consolidation for about a month that occurred just around 30,000, and that is going to be major resistance. So it's hard for me to imagine with the NASDAQ, even though I expect bounces there, I still think the NASDAQ's headed a lot lower, at least to the COVID highs, that the Bitcoin market would bottom just yet fully. So I still think we need to wash out more of the weak-handed Bitcoin, the cryptos, and that will finally give us later this year a big point bottom. 2 to 3 years out, I think we're back to 65. So I do think there's a decent chance that we're back to 65 within 2 or 3 years. I think this next 6 months or so is going to be the hardest. Then we'll bottom out, and then you'll probably have another 6 months of sideways chop. If we look at past cycles on Bitcoin, it's usually that first year down, and then you get a sideways kind of choppy where the bulls and the bears are just battling it out for a period of time. And then finally you start to get that move up. And I'm still a believer that inflation is going to be a systemic problem, maybe not at 8 or 9%, but at 5%. And I still believe that when the economy really tumbles here, and I'm starting to see the signals of that eventually the Fed will say, okay, we have 5% or 4% inflation, but we have 10% unemployment. We now need to print again, which is going to be another positive for Bitcoin. So again, there longer term, lots of positives for Bitcoin. I don't think it's going away. I don't think it's going to zero ever, but ultimately you just have to weather the storm essentially. Yeah, so the important thing is based on right now, the next target is 12,000, but I think it's important to recognize that it's very possible we go below 10,000, all right? You know, one thing I've learned in my trading career of stocks and commodities and now crypto is that assets go much further to the upside than anyone thinks and much further to the downside. I would say that you would prefer not to see the lows from 2018 and 19 taken out, which were around 3,500. Aside from that, this new unprecedented environment for crypto, because of the Fed and what they're doing, and they're pulling out money and sucking it out of the system, you have to expect that it could be a very rocky ride. So just to give you a sense of how I'm playing this, I started a HODL position at 19,000, just a small amount. I basically said to myself, what do I want to invest in Bitcoin over the longer term to just buy and hold? And I came up with a number and I divided it in 6 parts. And I took that first sixth amount of money and I bought at 19. And I'm going to basically put a buy level of that amount, 1/6 every 3,000 down. And so I'm looking at even potentially having some still buyable money even below 12,000, because I recognize from my history of trading that it can easily go below my lowest point. So I'm at a dollar cost average now, starting from 19, 16, 13, 10 and so forth, all the way down. Yeah. So when I say flat, it means that the market itself will kind of be choppy sideways, but you're going to have mini runs in there and mini collapses, right? So I think the best chart to look at is like, and this is kind of what I envision, right? If you look at the Hang Seng market, and I'll bring this up on the charts here. If you look at the Hang Seng market, we are actually still hovering at levels that we saw back in like 2000 and really 2009. I mean, the Hang Seng market right now is still at those levels. And if you actually go to the weekly chart here, you can see that technically we are just above the levels we saw at the highs of 2000. So basically for the last 20 years, the Hang Seng has had big pops, big drops, but ultimately it's trading the same area it was 20 years ago. And I think that that's the rotation we're going to see. We're going to start to see Asia take over. We're going to see them starting to have their breakout. The chart on the Hang Seng is actually a bullish chart if it can break the upper trend line around 32,000. And I think that the US then will be mired in this sideways chop for quite some time. But again, in understanding alpha, there's always places to look, right? So you have mini bull markets inside of a longer term sideways channel. And you also have certain sectors. I mean, gold, I still think is a no-brainer. Bitcoin, when it gets down in this lower sub 20,000, starts to look attractive. You'll have certain stocks like automation names as they start to move to a more robotic kind of economy where there's more robots doing jobs and so forth. So there's always going to be a bull market. It just takes a little bit more work than closing your eyes and just throwing a dart at the dartboard to make money. Gold is green for 2022. It is up on the year. Here we are halfway through the year. If you look at the stock market, S&P down over 20%, NASDAQ down over 30%, Bitcoin down. I mean, I don't even know what Bitcoin's down since the beginning of the year, but it's got to be close to 50% at this point. I will gladly take something that sucks ass if it keeps my money stable or gives me a small gain when all that carnage is going on.
Right. I mean, if gold sucks, what's everything else? Gold levels, what are you projecting for the rest of the year then?
Yeah, I continue to be bullish. We're still holding the breakout here. You guys can see this on my chart here. So again, we had the breakout. We had the beautiful double top here. We've now retraced to the scene of the crime. I think gold is getting that ready for its next vertical move here. And I think by the end of the year, we should be well above 2000. I think I had a $2,300, $2,400 price target by year end. I'm not sure if that's going to hold true, but again, we'll stick with it at this point and we'll kind of revisit it later in the year.